Hello, everybody. I'm Nick Bowling. Welcome to Timeline Theater and welcome to our online discussion of the LEHMAN Trilogy. I'm the director of the show. I'm also the associate artistic director at Timeline. And actually, my title is co-director because I co-directed with Vanessa Stalling. I'm going to introduce the actors from the show. First of all, I'll introduce Anish Jethmalani, who is right here. And he's a fellow company member at Timeline and plays the role of Emmanuel. Next, I'll introduce Mitchell Fain. Mitchell plays Henry in the show. There he is. And then I'll introduce Joey Slotnick, and Joey plays Meyer in the show. They all play many, many other roles as well. So we're happy to have you all here. I already did introductions. That was my first thing. So I introduced you for yourself. But I want to, we're going to talk a little bit and talk about the show. We've just been through a long process together and opened the show about a week and a half ago. And the guys are now in the middle of a run, and they're doing 8 shows a week, and of a fairly long show, and a grueling kind of experience in some ways, because the process was challenging. But let's go back before that, guys. I want to ask each of you a little bit about your experience when you first read the play. When you first encountered the play, what your initial thoughts were about it, and how, if you had an initial connection to it, and what those thoughts were. So how about I start with the first brother to arrive, with Mitchell.
Hello, everyone. I was lucky enough to do a reading of it with you guys, and that was the first time that I read it. So I didn't have to sit, the sort of daunting prospect of sitting and reading a 200-page play. I got to sit and hear it read. Anish was there as well. And I was sort of blown away by the language. I got very excited about it as we were reading it, the poetry of repetition, the poetry of imagery, and the sort of excavation of a story that I didn't know. It was exciting.
Great. And how about the second brother to arrive is Emmanuel, so that's Anish.
Hi, everybody. When I first came across the play, this is something that Timeline was thinking about producing, and we, as a company, read the play, and my first initial impression was that it was pretty vast and epic. I knew of its reputation as, the production that started in London with Sam Mendes directing, and it got tremendous reviews and tremendous praise. So I think for me, like, reading this play, it was just beautiful in terms of its lyricism, its poetic quality, and the fact that it was such a different take on what we've come to know as the Lehman Corporation. Most of it is from the 2008 financial crisis, but to see this long backstory of this family arriving in America and evolving through the critical events of American history was compelling and interesting and fascinating and heartbreaking. And so there were so many emotions that were brought to the surface by reading the play. And for me, my personal connection to it was the idea of a family immigrating to the country, trying to pursue the quote unquote American dream, and what that means to each individual. So I think that was sort of my in to the piece itself.
That's great. And last but not least, the youngest brother, Meyer Lehman, Joey Slotnick.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I was going to make a dumb joke, but I will avoid it. I had heard about the play also from its London run and from its New York run. I was living in New York at the time, and I wanted to see it, but of course things happened, and I didn't get a chance to, which I was happy about, because reading it on the page, it just jumps out at you. Like Mitchell was saying, the poetry, the way it's written on the page, it's this heightened kind of elevated experience when you're reading it. And it's almost, it just comes out of your mouth in this beautiful way. Like, oh my gosh, you can hear it almost when you're reading it. And that immediately, I just kind of connected with that. And then, yes, this beautiful Jewish immigrant story, many things that I had no idea about the Lehman Brothers and what they experienced, at least according to the play, certainly. And that made it really unique. And I was very excited about the idea of working on it. And certainly with these two gentlemen that I get to share the stage with, and with Nick and Vanessa. It's been a pretty incredible experience so far.
And just maybe to give a little bit of context to the audience about this question, which maybe will come up, is how did Timeline get the rights to this play, and how did this all even come about? You know, we're a small theater company. We're in a 100-seat theater on Wellington, and normally we really couldn't have competed for this major of a theatrical property. PJ and I went and saw there was a National Theater did a National Theater Live, and they played this on a movie screen up at Northwestern. We saw this probably 4 years ago, something like that, 5 years. And we both kind of thought like, this would be amazing, but probably never going to happen. But you know, who knows what can happen. And then the pandemic happened. It was supposed to be on a Broadway tour. Then it got shortened, the tour did, and only went to LA, and then it was supposed to come back. And a lot of things happened. And finally they said, nope, we're gonna, and we applied for the rights with Broadway in Chicago, doing this at the Broadway Playhouse, 550-seat theater. So now we're in the same world as the Goodman and Steppenwolf and all the major theaters in Chicago that might have also wanted to look at this as a possibility for their seasons. And so we acquired the rights. And I remember thinking, oh God, careful what you wish for, because I read it after I'd seen it on the stage, but then I read it and I thought, how are we going to do this thing? And my big initial thought was, I really want some help on this. And that's why we brought in Vanessa Stalling, who's an incredible director. And audiences from Timeline remember she worked on a play called Shayna Madel at Timeline. And she's worked around Chicago very successfully on many other plays as well. And so she was an amazing partner. She's not here today. She's back in California teaching at UCSD, but she was a big part of this whole process as well. Hey guys, maybe the next thing to talk about, I think it's interesting, and it's maybe weird with me here, but will you talk about your casting process? Some of you didn't go through a casting process, but two of you did. Will you just talk about what that's like, what it feels like to be cast in a show, or go through a casting process, what that whole experience is like? Mitchell, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Like I said before, Nick sort of championed me in a way, because he invited me to this reading that the company did of this play after they've got the rights, before they announced, if I'm correct, before you announced that you had the rights. We did this reading earlier this year. And so in my head, in my heart, I thought this is the beginning of the audition process for me. And so because I have never done a play with Timeline before, I had done another reading of a different play earlier this year. And so I thought, okay, bring your A game, Fain, pay attention. And then I found the subsequent audition process to be so challenging in the best way, in that it challenged my assumptions about my skill sets, saying, okay, you have the skill set, but you gotta jump it up, because this play and everything about it is like a play on steroids. Everything's a little bit bumped up. There's just more, and it's more intense, and there's more poetry and more words. And so I found it really challenging. And I also found the room to be so warm and open to experimentation and storytelling. And so I found the whole thing challenging in the best way. I often think to myself, if I'm not being challenged, I need to make better choices. So when I say challenging, that's a positive thing for me. I want to be challenged. And so I found it thrilling. And if I can say this with some sort of hubris, which I hope doesn't come crashing down on me, I felt quite confident. I felt like I understood this play, and I had a passion for this play. And I think that came across in my audition process.
Yeah, I agree. That's great, Mitchell. Anish, you didn't audition, and maybe that's a secret or not a secret, but you've been auditioning for Timeline for, well, let's say 13 years or something, or you've been working with this, is what I really need to say. And that we've done a lot of plays together over the years. So we knew that we wanted to have you be a part of this from the beginning.
Yeah, when Nick approached me about the play very early on, I was, of course, very humbled by the fact that I was even being considered for it. I wanted to read the play and kind of get an understanding of like, well, do I even fit in this, at all? And I think that for me, like I I wanted to go through the process of thinking about it and also trying to understand my into this world, because sometimes you just want to be very conscious of the decisions that you're making. And I think that for me, like having that conversation about trying to open this world up to making it more universal, trying to sort of understand what the immigrant experience is like. I think that was sort of my in. That was my connection to it. Even though this is a story about a Jewish family, we as storytellers, the three storytellers of this play numerous characters, and we also wanted to sort of open that experience up, that what it is to be American in this day and age, and how the country was built on the backs of slavery, around indigenous people, people of color. So I think there was this idea that we want to make it more universal, and how the idea and cost of capitalism really strips away at personal identity. And so I think that was sort of my into the piece. And I also had to think about the logistics and just the Herculean nature of being able to do a piece like this, because it's not easy, even for the most seasoned pro actor. It is not an easy play at all. I was seeing there was a question about preparation. It took me almost a year of prep time to get ready for this, and so like I had to sit down with the script, really start looking at getting off book as quickly as possible. We were all tasked with that that effort, but I think that even to the auditions, I wanted to also ensure like that the best people were cast for the show. So we weren't even sure, like going in, like was I going to still stay with it? We wanted to find the right chemistry of actors for the show. That was the most important thing. So that was my take on this.
Great. Joey, talk about your casting process and what that was like for you.
Well, I had a dear friend of mine and a wonderful Chicago actor, Larry Grimm, sent me the script. He said, the timeline is doing this. You should read this script. You should audition for it. And so that's when I read it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds great. And yes, I came into audition, and the room was very warm. I mean, Nick, you were just totally open, and Anish was there as a reader to kind of read with us, which was really great. And I think I went in with, with a certain confidence also, weirdly, where, if I get it, great. If I don't, not a problem either. So I didn't hang a lot of like, oh God, I have to have this. I have to do this. And I think that I came in relaxed in a way and ready to work and ready to play. And luckily, Nick, you were open to like playing and working, giving some direction here and direction there. And that felt great. And so, and then with my callback, I felt like, okay, now it's a little more heightened. I've got to, make sure I'm there and do my thing. But I didn't put a lot of pressure on myself. And maybe that was a more relaxed me in a room. So, but it was a very positive experience. And they're not always positive experiences, auditions.
That's good to hear. Hey, let me ask this of Joey and Mitchell. Anish talks a little bit about his connection as an immigrant to this story. Anish and I talked a lot about this. Like, what if I'm not Jewish, and how does that feel as somebody who's not Jewish? But he connected to the immigrant story in a way that very few people could, in that his parents were immigrants in America, and Anish sort of was the child born here, and that not unlike Philip Lehman kind of story, one of the characters in the play. How did you, Mitchell, and Joey connect this play, and how strong was the Jewish connection for you, etc.? So maybe I'll start with you, Mitchell, because we've had a few conversations about this, I know, and so let's talk about that just a little bit.
I am not a first generation American, but I'm a second generation American. And so I still remember my immigrant grandparents and the stories of my great grandfather who came to America from Russia. And he escaped the pogroms, and he had no education, and he was basically a junk man. And somehow he turned being a junk man into a resale shop, which turned into a series of shops, So the experience is very familiar story in my family. And I also found, as far as the Jewishness goes, is that there's the adaptation of this play. There are rhythms to this language that feel very Jewish. I mean, I know that Jewish is a hard thing to describe because Jewish can be both a religion and an identity, a race per se. But there's a quality to the language that I could feel the rhythm of these people, and so it felt authentic to me, despite the fact that it was written by an Italian and then translated for a British stage and then adapted for the New York stage. There still felt an authenticity to Judaism or Judaica that really resonated with me, and it felt in a way sort of important for me to be able to tell this story.
That's great. Joey?
I feel that I guess the being Jewish, I didn't have to do any of that. You know, I mean, there's like the familiarity is just in here. So it's really lovely to hear, you know, to say the lovely is a strange word, but you know, to say the Kaddish on stage is a very odd thing. You don't really, it's very theatrical. And I think we realize that is something that's part of the play, which is the Kaddish is said in the play a couple of times. And, you know, you do that in a temple or privately or with, you know, covering over your head. So that's a little odd, but I knew that prayer from listening to my dad say it when his father passed away. And, you know, so there's a familiarity, the familiarity of the Hebrew months, the holidays, you know, all of that stuff fills me with a weird, kind of confidence and beauty. There's something beautiful about it. And so having the story kind of come from these chapters is really unique. And I don't think you see that a lot. And you know, that Jewish experience, that coming over with, as the immigrant experience, coming over with nothing, almost nothing, and creating this world, you know, to jump on Mitchell's story. Also, my great-grandfather had a bottle washing company on Elston Avenue. And he also they came from Russia. And then my grandfather had it and made it to a junk shop called Elston Metal and Salvage. And that was in our family for many, many years. And I would answer the phone there when I was a little kid, Elston Metal and Salvage, you know, so there's that kind of experience too. And so, it's a very, it's something that's like in me.
Great. There's plenty of questions coming in through the Q&A. There's a question about the dumb joke, but who mentioned dumb joke? Was that Mitchell that said
no,
something?
Joey said he was going to make a dumb joke, but he chose not to.
Oh, somebody asked. They're like, we want to know your dumb joke, but maybe you decline. It's too dumb. I declined.
It was going to be, how did you like the play? And I was going to say, nah.
Okay, well, that was kind of dumb.
But funny.
Hey, you know, the funny thing about this show. So after the show, I was there 2 nights ago again, and like I saw people in the audience come up to the guys and say the age-old audience point of view, which is, how did you learn all those lines? But with this play, it really has power. That question, more than almost any other time we've done a play, it means something. And, you know, maybe it's just valuable to talk just a little bit about what that process was like. Anish, you said you started memorizing a year ago, but, you know, let's talk about what was that process of memorizing this much of a play? Because I think for many audience members, that is a daunting task on an average play, but on this show, it really meant something. Joey, you want to talk about that? I'll start with you now.
Sure. I mean, I think Anish had the initial idea of, like, during the summer, before 2 or 3 months before we started rehearsal, he said, I think maybe we should get together and try and memorize maybe the first act, give ourselves a month, get together, then do the second act. And that was a wonderful idea. So basically we spent our summers memorizing this play. This play would be an impossible task to start memorizing once a rehearsal begins. It's just, you can't do it. It would be impossible unless you are some sort of savant. And it is a daunting task. When I didn't have all of my lines together when we started tech rehearsal. And that's a terrifying position to be in, and not really fair to my co-actors or directors, or, you know, but they were all very welcoming and supportive, and, you know, and I got there, no problem. It was hard. It's not easy. You know, you sit with this, my process, is different, I think, with every play. But for this, it's like I write my lines, the first letter of every line I write in the margin of my script. Just initially, that's any script. You just kind of get a little head start, just a little pattern. Like, oh, okay, now I can just maybe look at the first letter here, and then I'll know the word. But with this, it was just back and forth. It was just going over a couple of lines and then repeating it, going over a couple lines, repeating it. Because usually when you start to memorize, you want to be on your feet. You want to be there with your co-actors playing, and then you can react off them, and then the line kind of comes naturally. But we didn't have that luxury. You know, we had to do it kind of by ourselves, or with a friend or with a spouse or something, to say, hey, can you help me? So I had friends to do that. But it was hard. It was hard. We did it, but it was hard.
And Mitchell, there's particularly tricky things about memorizing this script because it comes back in waves and it repeats, but differently later on. Will you talk about that challenge?
Yes, that is particularly hard. And because there's so much repetition that you have to nail, because you have to get the words right so that it pays off later. And if you paraphrase or change the word, then the payoff 100 pages later doesn't connect. And so you have to be very specific about certain things. You have to recognize that particular image has to be specific. And so there's, oftentimes we memorize and we paraphrase until we get line notes from a stage manager saying, oh, you messed this up, and you can usually fix them. But in a 177-page play, you can only manage so many line notes. And so it is a challenge to be that specific before you get to be on stage in a rehearsal room with fellow actors, with props, with scenes, with furniture, which usually is what connects you to the language. You remember that this thing comes next because I'm standing here and I'm looking in so-and-so's eyes, and we didn't have that. I have to say I was blessed because I got to spend the summer where I grew up in Rhode Island, and my brother, who lives there, had complained last summer that I didn't spend enough time with him. So I said, oh, okay, good. You want to spend time with me? You have to help me learn my lines. So I spent the summer making my brother help me with my lines.
Great. God bless him. Truly. Anish, do you have any thoughts about any of that?
No, I think just to what both Joey and Mitchell said, I even had like friends who came saw the show. They have been acting for many years, and their first question was, how did you memorize all that? And they get that question all the time. And so like I said, like this was not easy for even the most seasoned pro. I go back to this interview with Peter O'Toole. He did, which is, if anybody has a chance to look it up, it's a great interview. And he just talks about this idea, and it stuck with me going through this process. Was it's all about just intense study, being in a quiet place, free from distraction, and looking at the words, saying the words, looking over the words again, saying the words, and going through that process over and over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, I would be spending hours into the night, because for me, that's where I work best, is going into the night, letting the words sit in my brain overnight, and then coming back to it. And that's what it was. It was just this really painful, time of really just getting these words. And then, when you go into the rehearsal process, they're just words. There's no intention behind them. There's no feeling behind them. It's just words. But you want to have those words already locked into a certain place, so that when you start to craft those intentions and you try to craft those moments, and you're trying to figure out what is your action and how are you going to sort of work with your partner, your scene partner, that those words come to life, and that you're not only lifting the words off the page, but you're bringing the emotional quality behind it, the lyricism behind it. You're really playing with the words, and that's the beautiful part of the rehearsal process, is really making those words come to life. But otherwise, they're just words. But we needed to get those words into our brain, and that just takes so much time.
I just wanted to clarify for the audience, because it sounds like when you guys say and we were all on our own, we didn't have anyone to help us. That was the summer before we started rehearsal. So that's what they're saying, is they were sort of on their own that summer. And Anish had the smart idea to have them come together a few times, which was great. But still, really, they were kind of on their own till we got to rehearsal. I should also say that then those of you that have seen the play know that it's quite an enormous set. We decided one option would be that we normally do in the theater is we do what we call tape out the set. That means everything's on the floor level with tape. And if there's stairs, they put like +8 or +10 or +16, meaning you're up 16 inches and you pretend you're stepping up steps, but you're always on the same level. But thank God, Maggie Full-Love Nugent, who's our production manager, and Emmanuel Jimenez, who's our TD, made the decision that it would be helpful to us to have a kind of a resemblance of the set in our theater at Timeline. And they built kind of a mock version of it that was not perfect, and it kind of screwed us up in some ways later. Like, we're like, wait, the steps aren't there, they're over there. But in a way, it gave us a sense of the task ahead of playing in this jungle gym. Well, maybe I'll just ask that question then of y'all. What's it like working on this set? And how's it feel to work on a big set like this?
Have you seen the show American Ninja Warrior?
Yeah.
That's right.
I have, yes.
I gotta
That's
say,
what it feels like, huh?
I've been in a circus since 1998, like an actual circus, and this play is so physically exhausting. I knew going in that it would be like mentally exhausting. I knew that it would be vocally tiring. I did not know that it would be. I mean, I get my steps in the third act when I'm Ruth Lamar. Every time I enter as Ruth, I have to go up this enormous staircase every time. Finish a scene, go back up the stairs, come back down the stairs. I mean, I don't know. I challenge anyone else my age to do that many stairs in 3 hours. It's a challenge. It is, like Anish was saying, that this play, even professionals are saying, how did you memorize so many lines? I would say even professionals would be challenged by the enormity of the set, because there's no pausing. There's no times where we quietly just sort of linger on the set. It's constant. And so it is a physical challenge. Once again, I like a challenge, so it's good, but it is not for the uninitiated.
That's true. You guys want to talk about that at all, Joey or Anish?
I mean, it's tricky. It's you got to really pay attention. You have to really be present. Your mind cannot go anywhere but be in the moment. There are a lot of steps. There are a lot of little tricky areas. It's dark. It's just, I mean, it's a great set, but it's certainly not the smoothest way to move around. There's a lot of levels to it, and it's circuitous in ways, and it's got to be. I think we're very sensitive and very careful.
A little fun tidbit for the audience that's a challenge for the actors is the whole set is broken into thirds. So it's broken into the 3 levels of the set are at 30 inches, 60 inches, and 90 inches. And those levels are broken down into 3 steps at 10, 20, and 30 inches. So the steps in the show are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, all the way up. So there's 9 steps to the top. Normal steps are about 8 inches or 7 inches, and sometimes as low as 6 inches to make things comfortable. These are 10-inch steps, so it just adds, there's a beauty to that thirds in the whole show, and that it's a trilogy and everything's about threes, but also it's a challenge besides.
And keep in mind, there are days we're doing this twice.
Yes.
2 shows. Yeah. And so we're definitely getting our workout in, mentally and physically.
That's right. That's right. Hey guys, I want to talk about characters because I know there's audience members that are asking about this. Well, let's say this. There's a question of, who made the decision about men playing women. I think I'll just put this out there that the original production in London, apparently, this is from stories that we've heard, that the London production, they started a workshop and they had something like 30 actors cast for the national production. And apparently, this might be apocryphal, it might be true, but Simon Beale, who played Henry, apparently realized that his character died. Henry dies very early on in the play, and he came back and said to Sam Mendes, the director, "What if we played multiple characters and it's fewer actors and we played them throughout the play?" And eventually, they had the idea that this trilogy of 3 acts about 3 brothers maybe should be played by 3 actors. And so that's the genesis of why 3 men are playing all the women in the play, etc. And so that, to help answer that question for the audience. But now I want to come to you all and say, talk to me about, let's start with this. What's the most fun character you play of all the characters you play? And what's the most challenging? What was the most challenging? Maybe it's not still the most challenging, but what was the hardest one to get your hands wrapped around or whatever? How about we start with Mitchell? How about you? You play a lot of them.
I play a lot of them. I have to say that my favorite character, and I got a message last night from a friend who had never seen me in a play before, and all he said to me was, I could watch Ruth all day. So Ruth Lamar was the woman who married Robert Lehman, and she appears in the third act, and she has some juicy scenes. And Joey and I sort of play them, like we're Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell in His Girl Friday. And so my favorite character is Ruth. I just love Ruth. I think she's like full of moxie, and I like her very much. But I think the most challenging, and Nick, you know this because we worked on it so hard, and
I do.
is
Yeah.
Philip Lehman, because Philip Lehman in a way is so close to me. Like Philip Lehman, probably, my physicality and voice and accent. And so trying to find a delineation between Mitchell and Philip Lehman, and also realizing Vanessa and Nick's vision of Philip, the way that they saw him, and then filtering that through myself was the most challenging. But now I have to say, the most satisfying.
Yeah.
Like Ruth is the most fun, but Philip is the most satisfying. Another friend of mine who had never seen me in a play, I find it interesting, people's non-regular theater goers' opinions of this play, because they're coming at it not from a professional, like, oh, wow, I can't believe you guys are doing it. They're just coming in fresh. And one of the things that I've gotten a comment on a couple of times, and this is, I guess self-congratulatory, but mostly for Nick and Vanessa, which is they found it very satisfying that Philip is the same person at 6 years old and at 70 years old. But we get to see him age, and I find that very, very, very satisfying feedback, because it was very challenging and now very satisfying.
It's lovely, Mitchell, because early on you were like, well, I think the glasses will do it. And in a way, in some ways, I think we pushed, but you were right. Our concern was that when you talked to Philip and you talked to Mitchell, that we didn't see the definition. And now it's so small. He is a lot like you, but I absolutely always know when Philip's on stage. It's like a character has arrived on stage. It's fun to see. Joey, how about you?
I think I have. I think a lot of the challenge for me was certainly the women that Philip wants to choose to be his wife. So those kind of that was very challenging. Challenging to get into my head. Challenging to kind of find different ways to do that and treat them all with respect and a love, which I really enjoyed. But that was certainly a challenge. I love playing. There's different moments. I love Meyer in the second act, and then I get to change into a young Bobby, and I think Bobby's my most challenging. I think that's still, yeah. Though I feel like I am a lot like Bobby in many ways, but that feels challenging too. Still in the third act, certainly when he becomes this, when he's driving this company, when he's driving these ideas, and that's always a bit of a challenge, but I'm enjoying it.
Things about the play is that you either play characters that lived a long time, and then you don't play as many characters because Emmanuel sort of is like this, or you play a lot of little characters who either came in and out or died early or whatever. So Anish, let's talk about your characters.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's no doubt the most challenging character I play is Emmanuel Lehman. And it's interesting that, Joey mentioned Bobby and Mitchell mentioned Philip. If you look at it, really, of the three parts, it really is Emmanuel's lineage that is this story. Emmanuel is that first part. We're seeing his journey. And then in part two, it's all about Philip. And in part three, it's all about Bobby. And so that, I think, really kind of, underscores how challenging it is to play those three roles. And so that's been the most challenging role for me, is that first part. I think in terms of the roles that I like to play the most or just have fun with, I love Herbert Lehman. He's a character, especially in the classroom scene and sort of his just defiance. And I love everything about Herbert in terms of his progressive values and just seeing that character evolve over part two. I like Lou Glucksman. He's so different from who I am, and so I get to kind of venture into that sort of underworld to a certain extent. And I would say my youngest, who came to see the play yesterday, his favorite character was Harlan, who's one of the two computer guys, because he gets to say dude and he gets to be a little loose. And so I love, it's only a few minutes on stage, but I love playing that character too.
That's great. I love Glucksman too, Anish, because he is sort of different from you. He's this like boldly tough guy, ballsy guy from the Bronx or wherever he's from. And he's just like, it's so not you, but you embody him very well and boldly. So it's fun to see all that. And yeah, and Joey, I was thinking about you talking about the 8 women that you end up playing, and it's so fast, and you have to jump from woman to 8 women, and then you do the same thing later in the play. I think it's later, where you play 8 young children in a row or something. So you have these really fast, quick changes and had to do these crazy jumps into different characters that nobody else has to do that so much in the play, but you do it twice, no less. It was kind of fun. Hey, let's talk about this, guys. Tell me about what surprised you. Were there any surprises along the way? Separate from the things that we've talked about with some of the physicality and the memorizing and all those things, but were there surprises about the play, about the realization of the characters, even about the process in some way? Was there something that surprised you along the way? Feel free to jump in, one of you, or I'll call on you. Anish or Joey. Yes, good, Joey.
I don't know if anything comes to my mind. I mean, surprise. I don't know if things come to my mind that surprised me. I think I like what Anish was saying about the lineage. Like in the beginning of this process, we had to say, wait a minute, now Philip is your kid, and then where does this come from, and how did they meet? And that was, and that's an attributed to Ben, who adapted it, certainly, and to Stefano, who wrote it. But I mean, just the connection and how everything was trimmed down, and you have the actors playing these specific characters and how they follow, and it's a really beautiful, circuitous road, but it's really quite deliberate. I guess that was kind of surprising to me, and to just initially remembering that. I love how Philip, with his when he keeps on saying, if you'll forgive me, I must take my leave, and how that kind of pays off with Bobby being that, also turning out to say those same words to his father. And like, that's kind of surprising and fun. And also how things pay off throughout the play, how an idea happens in the first act, comes back in the third act, or it keeps popping up. Like, those are really beautiful surprises, I think, for the audience too.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else, guys? Anything else that surprised you?
I find it surprising almost every night that there's some detail, not of the script. I don't mean the artistry of it, but the concept. Like Lou Glucksman's speech about what he does for a living and how the trading floors work is. I'm always surprised by my lack of like how I never really understood that. Or Anish also has a speech about the invention of marketing and the sort of staggering change in a culture that marketing became. I find myself constantly surprised by the concepts, or the fact that a fire in Montgomery created a situation that allowed the Lehman Brothers to become as successful as they were. This sort of like boon from a tragedy. All those things, as I listen, like Joey says, this is not a play where you can tune out. You have to pay attention all the time, or you'll fall down, or you'll miss your line. One or both of those things could happen. And so I'm constantly re-listening to some of these speeches about the concepts. And, it's a testament to my fellow actors that they both make them so compelling that I find myself like, whoa, wow, that's so interesting. So that surprises me, that I'm still I'm still like digesting all of those concepts.
That's great. That's great. Hey, I want to talk just a little bit about, so this play is written by an Italian playwright, not an American playwright, not a Jewish playwright. Do you all want to just talk about the experience of, and it was first produced by a British theater company, right? The National Theater, and the Broadway production was the National's production, a British production of Brits, almost all Brits. I mean, all Brits playing the roles and interpreting this play about America. What was it like to? We are now the second American production, but I think we may have had the rights and announced it before anybody else, but we are now the second, I think, or something like that, American production. What's it feel like to do an American production of this play? And at what point did you have a sense of, wow, this is written not as an American, it's written from an outsider's perspective, and how that felt to interpret it from inside America? Does anybody have a thought on that?
Yeah,
Anish,
I
talk
I
about that?
I think it's interesting how much Stefano was able to really grasp in terms of uh, American identity, in terms of how economies and culture and um, values and this idea of like how America evolved over time, and to be able to do it in, because originally this piece started as like almost a 5 to 8 hour play. I mean, it was with like multiple actors, and they were telling. And then there's a novel as well that he wrote called the LEHMAN Trilogy. So if you read the novel, there's more there that goes into much more of the backstory and different types of angles. But I think that for me, like, I thought it was really enlightening on how he was able to capture so much of the American story. The only thing that I would say is that I think um, some criticism has been raised about like not spending enough time talking about how America was really born, which was on the backs of slaves and on the backs of indigenous people. And we try to really emphasize that through our delivery. I have like one section where we go into the director of marketing, and I've been very conscious about trying to really slow that down and really hit the point that this is, my line is, the great grandchildren of slaves who once picked Lehman's cotton now march over bridges, demand their rights. We're trying to be really deliberate about highlighting those moments when we can. And we also do a huge backstory in our program materials in the lobby as well. But this is where I would say that I think that from an Italian, if we're asking that question about from the Italian writer's perspective, translating it to English production and then coming here, I think if this had originated here, maybe more time would have been spent asking those questions within the text. And so I think we are trying to lift that up as much as possible. But these are questions that I think that we want to hand over to the audience to be able to ponder and have those discussions themselves as well. Like, how was America evolved? How did we become so successful? It just wasn't like, something that came out of the blue. It was, from a very dark place.
I actually find it very interesting often when someone not from America tells an American story. I often find it very illuminating. And while it may not be 100% like sort of factual of our lived lives, they're often the story that gets told in a grander way is closer to the truth sometimes, in the way in which stories work. For example, Robin Altman's Nashville, or Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain, or Milos Forman's Hair, right? These are all not American directors telling very American stories. And I find their perspective on it, their distance from the story, often very interesting. And I find that's true here as well.
Yeah. Hey, I want to answer some of the questions and pose them to all of you. I think we've talked about how you prepared separately and together, and to kind of come together with this. Mitchell, there's a question of where, when, how did the confidence come with this show? Could you have an answer for that?
Well, I mean, I'm a pretty confident guy, and just in general, It's hard won, but we all have to find it at some point. What would Judah Ben Tema say? At what age did I? At 70, I gained perspective. I'm not there yet, but I'm close. Um, I think I think I felt confident because I understood this piece. Of course, I didn't know how to do it yet. It took a whole process to understand how to make this play real. But when I read it, it sat in me, and I think I felt confident because I was like, I understand it. I understand what's going on, and that's where the confidence came from.
Maybe I'll direct this one to you, Joey. You play a lot. Bobby is the character that really takes us right up to the end of the play, and then the end of the play is maybe 8 pages that take us from sort of 80 to 2008. That bothers some people about the play. And I've heard people say it. In fact, I was with a group of people last night that said, why did it go so fast? And I mean, obviously, one quick answer is, did you want a 4th act of another hour? Because it would at least take that much time. But also, there's the point that this is the part that's most familiar to people these days. That what happened in 2008 and how we got to 2008. But do you have any other thoughts about that quick ending? And is it weird as actors to play such a kind of a quick, tight ending of a play?
Anish and I were just talking about this, I think, last night, about that 3rd act, how that 3rd act lives in a very different space. It feels a little more, I want to quote unquote unrealistic. I mean, yes, it's real, but yet it floats in a different place, in a different space. And so I think it allows itself to move quickly. And yeah, it's odd to do that. It's certainly odd to like that pace, but I think our characters are there in very strong ways that we can follow that. That's certainly my in. It's not less about time and more about this character. How does that character move through such a short period of time? And yeah, there's a lot of information. And sure, we'd love to spend more time on like what happened after World War II or what happened. And then we get into the 60s and there's the dancing and, it's weird. It's weird. The dream is weird. There's all kinds of weird things that happen. But I don't know. I guess it's from an audience perspective, like, exactly. How did you feel? Did it bother you? Did you want more time? Was it enough?
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about him taking the time when he wanted to take the time with this story, in the parts of this story, which was frankly the Lehman family. That's the story he wanted to tell. And when it became not the Lehman family, which is right in that time, right around 80, when Bobby dies, that's the part he said, we're going to give you the quick Reader's Digest version of this part of the show, because this part is close. You know what this is. And timeline is obviously, if you go to the lobby, you should be able to see all of that detail. A guy that I was with last night who worked for the Lehman family, he worked for the Lehman brothers during some of this time, said, hey, that dramaturgy in the lobby that Duran and Kat and Pamela did was incredible and really accurate. And he goes, it sort of brought back scary memories of being a part of all of that stuff. So it's a fascinating idea. Hey, there's a question in here. I'll start with you, Mitchell, about this one. There's a question here about this play has been considered anti-Semitic, and these characters have been thought of as anti-Semitic. And this person in the question said they felt some of that during the play, and we're surprised that some of the reviews didn't mention this, or that maybe that we aren't talking more about it. We have a statement about this that we've written, and I think it's on our website. And also, you helped prepare that statement with Pamela a little bit, who is our Jewish studies consultant. Will you talk about your thoughts about that idea a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, there is an association. I'm just going to call it out. There's an association, particularly in America, with Jews and money. Now, where does that come from? When one just says that and has a reaction to it without understanding that part of the reason why there's been attachment with Jews and money, that for many, many years, the Jews were not allowed to do anything else but things like usury, which was loaning. They weren't allowed. It was a shameful profession, and it was the only thing they were allowed to do. So then you immigrate to America at the same time that industry is happening. And guess what? The Jews have the skill set to make this all happen. So add on top of that the Jews can be a tight knit group. Part of being Jewish is taking care of one's own, feeding one's own, clothing one's own, educating one's own. That's what the chosen people means. So you add that kind of self care with a success, and then you get this idea of Jews and money. It's an incredibly anti-Semitic trope. Now, this family happens to be a Jewish family who did a lot of good and a lot of bad with their money and their ambition. And when I hear this question, I ask myself, are you asking the same question about any play or movie or television series you've ever heard about the Roosevelts, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Astors,
Carnegie's.
the Carnegies, who are not Jewish? This play happens to be about a Jewish family. It happens to be about their success. And if you don't add in the context of why Jews in America are associated with money and what happened to the Jewish people that allowed that to be true, then I challenge the question, is my answer. I think this play deals with the Lehman Brothers. It's the story of this family. If one is curious about other families and how they dealt with money, read Anderson Cooper's new book about the Astors. If you think this is anti-Semitic, would you say that the Astors are anti-what? Christian, anti-WASP, anti-landed gentry? To be honest, they're much worse. The stories are horrifying. So that's my answer. Go read the book about the Astors.
Great. Hey, there's another interesting question at the end here, which is, were the Lehman Brothers a scapegoat in 2008 for the government? And it goes back to the question of back in 1929, did they stay afloat till other banks were bankrupt and then the government would back them? That seems to be in the play intentionally. That idea that in 29 something similar happened, where would the government back the banks again? And in 2008, well, Bear Stearns is the first major bank to kind of fail, but it was bought up by, I think, J.P. Morgan, bought up Bear Stearns and took on its debt, etc. Then Lehman came about, and there was talk that Barclays was going to help them. And then there was talk that all the banks would come together. Bank of America was another one. And then all the banks would come together and maybe help Lehman. And it ended up all the banks were in trouble, but they could have helped save Lehman. The government could have helped save Lehman. But this is such complicated stuff. There may have been a game of chicken with the government of, will you banks take care of your own and not make the government get involved? Of course, then the government does get involved later and save all those other banks, and kind of help save the American economy in some ways. These are all questions of perspective. It's very political and very complicated. And I think we're going to dive deeper into this in our next conversation with our scholars next Sunday to really talk about the economics of what happened in 2008. Answering that question is so complicated. There's even thoughts that the government might have been, apparently Lehman maybe did not help another bank failure in 1998, and Lehman was one of the few that did not step up, and so maybe there was some pushback there. But also Lehman was going through such weird changes in these years, and the banks were all playing fast and loose with a lot of financial matters. So it's very complicated, and it's probably I've given you a very quick answer on the amount of knowledge that we've all been able to gain about the financial crisis. Go ahead, Anish.
I think there was tremendous political pressure at that time, because I remember that Lehman was. There was such public scrutiny of these bailouts. And I think Lehman was one of those first entities that they said, we're going to draw the line in the sand here and let this one collapse. I think not knowing what the ramifications of that would have been, So if you really look back at that time in history, to your point, Nick, like with Bear Stearns, I think Lehman was just not given that opportunity to be bailed out, and they became sort of the example as what happens when a firm collapses, and then what are the consequences of that to the broader economy and to the market. To this day, even now, we still haven't had consequences for the people who were, at the center of all of those shenanigans. And so I think there is there's this big question of like, where are the consequences of the people that were in charge during that time period? And that question has not been answered.
And yeah, go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I was going to say that the answer to this is a little bit in the play in the first act. All the shenanigans that Anish refers to that went on from the 80s on, the predatory lending and all of that. At the end of the first act, Dr. Beauchamp says to Meyer, everything built here was built on a crime. The roots run so deep that you cannot see them, but the ground beneath our feet is poisoned. It had to end this way. I sort of feel like it's in the play.
Yeah.
It's
You're
what
right,
happened.
Mitchell. It's almost what I was going to say, which is that, and it's not to say this is just the heads of those companies. It was everybody involved, many, many people involved with the companies, and frankly, our own government, who had deregulated. And, and again, this is us talking as theater people who have researched this over the past few months, but not people who have studied this for our whole lives. So none of us are talking as experts. We're only talking about people that have been playing in this world for a short while and trying to understand like how these things happened and how will this all happen again someday. Many people, young people that have been around this play have said things like, gosh, the government shouldn't have bailed out any of these banks. And I think, well, yeah, that's a great thought, but that also has enormous consequences that we never had to see.
It would have had tremendous consequences. It would have led to the Great Depression.
To other things, right? And these are weird trade-offs to talk about. And well, if those banks didn't get punished enough, and if they'd been punished more, would we have been able to recover as quickly as a country as we did, et cetera, et cetera? So it's a very interesting question and a challenging question around this play. And again, one that Massino talks about, but and Mitchell said so beautifully, like that's how he deals with it. He deals with it in a more kind of a bigger picture kind of way, in a more thoughtful way, and a historical way that makes you think this is something we're going to be dealing with forever in a way in this country. Mm-hmm. Guys, do you have any closing thoughts about how about this question? What are you excited for over the next 6 weeks of doing this run? Anyone?
For me, I think it's just getting it more in my body, more familiar, just doing it again and again. I mean, there's so many moments when I'm on stage, but I just love to listen. There's so many wonderful sections and scenes that I get to just sit and listen to these two wonderful actors and play at the same time. And it's just more of that, more of that.
Right.
I second that. I was thinking, I said this to Joey yesterday. I didn't get a chance to say it to Anish because his dressing room isn't next door to mine, but I have such joy playing with these two gentlemen every night, while we're staying within the storytelling that we've been directed and understanding what story we're telling. I get to watch these two beautiful actors making such interesting, new, surprising choices every night. And so I'm looking forward to playing.
I share the same sentiments. It's just such an honor and pleasure to be with these two guys. And, I should mention the fourth actor in the show, which is the audience. And you as the audience are so much a part of our experience. We can hear you, we can see you, we interact with you. And so you're giving us so much information that it feeds us as actors to be able to tell the story. And it's an immersive experience. And I would say if you've come to see the show, please tell your friends. We have another 6 weeks left in the run. If you haven't seen the show, please come and see the show. And we think you'll have a really great time at the theater.
And we can hear when you unwrap your candy.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
And check your phones.
So maybe before the show. That's all.
Or during one of the two intermissions. Those
One of the two
opportunities. Guys, it's been a pleasure to talk to all of you. And audience, thank you for all of your terrific questions. We're thrilled to be here with you, and we hope all of you see the show. And if you've already seen it, also tell your friends, please. We'd love you to help keep our audience full all the way to the end. We've got a lot of tickets sold already, and we've now extended for 3 more weeks. So fill it up with your friends and let them know about the show. Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.